The Albanian gangs are recruiting migrants to get some of them to work in the illegal UK drugs trade. The BBC is told that immigration officials on both sides of the channel are worried about the growing role of Albanian middlemen promising easy passage.
They offered me lots of things, to pay for the journey, to give me a job, but I wasn't interested. They asked me 4 or 5 times.
We'll have more on that BBC investigation, also this lunchtime. Discounts on energy bills for households that use less during peak times. A new trial from National Grid to avoid blackouts. The government confirms there won't be a Stormont Assembly election in December, pushing the Northern Ireland vote into next year. Famous theatres in London lose grants in favour of bodies outside the capital in a major change to arts funding in England. And exactly 100 years since its discovery, we hear about the continuing fascination with Tutankhamun's 3,000-year-old tomb.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, England know they have to beat Sri Lanka tomorrow to reach the T20 World Cup semi-final after Australia edged a close win over Afghanistan.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News. In a week that has been dominated by news about the immigration system, the BBC has heard evidence that Albanian drug gangs are using migrant camps in northern France as a recruitment ground, offering to pay the passage of people who are looking for better economic prospects and are prepared to work in the UK's illegal drugs trade. Albanians account for at least a third of the 38,000 people who've crossed the Channel to England this year, according to the latest government figures. Our correspondent Lucy Williamson has this report.
For each boat, each migrant, there can be many smugglers. Albanian fixers, UK guarantors, Kurdish criminal gangs. One man who paid for a place on a Kurdish boat this summer says he was approached by recruiters for the UK drugs trade in a Dunkirk migrant camp.
They offered me lots of things, to pay for the journey, to give me a job, but I wasn't interested. They asked me 4 or 5 times.
This is where the Albanian migrant trail begins. Small towns like Lagnas, marked by absence. The shuttered houses and empty cafes, leftovers of an exodus that spiked this year. As the price of crossing to the UK has dropped, the suburbs around Tirana are being drained of people. Locals in this neighbourhood say 70% of the community has already left, and many of those living here now are thinking of joining them. Adverts on Albanian social media promise easy passage for about £3,000, with middlemen on hand to arrange transport from Brussels, Paris or Dunkirk. We contacted some of them, posing as an Albanian client. Within half an hour, we had 2 offers for crossings, different options for payment, and advice on claiming asylum in the UK. This system is one reason UK police say the networks are hard to break.
Whereas in drugs, firearms, you would see a hierarchical structure with a kingpin at the top. We don't see that with organised immigration crime. We see close associations, loose networks across that migration route.
French officials say that Albanians are acting as middlemen for the Iraqi Kurdish gangs that still control most boat crossings from France. Majlinda's son crossed from Dunkirk last month without the help of fixers or even the money to pay the smugglers. A relative in England acted as guarantor, she said, and got her son across. His younger brother, just 14 years old, is already planning his own trip. Each successful crossing, an invisible thread that tugs at the minds of Albanians back home. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Dunkirk.
Well, our home editor, Mark Easton, is with me. And what Lucy is talking about there is one strand of this growing issue.
Yes, I mean, the numbers are extraordinary. 2 years ago, we had 50 Albanians crossing in small boats. This year already 12,000, of which 10,000 are single men. That equates to about 1 to 2% of all the single men in Albania. Just as Lucy was finding those almost abandoned villages, they're coming here. But I think there are three groups of people who are on those boats. There are the economic migrants, because Albania is a very poor country, incomes 10 times in the UK, 10 times greater than Albania. You can see why that would be a draw. The criminals, the traffickers, exactly as Lucy was finding out. But it's also worth reminding ourselves that within that group there are also victims of trafficking, victims of exploitation, and victims of modern day slavery. If I tell you that in the 3 months, July, August, September this year, the modern-day slavery referral system saw 934, this is just in those 3 months, Albanian adults identified as potential victims, and 204 Albanian children, under 18-year-olds, also identified just in those, 90-odd days. So you can see some of them, of course, will just be trying it on, using that as a way of staying in the country. But it's worth knowing that on the most recent figures, somewhere between 80 and 90% of those who are referred to that referral mechanism, their cases are upheld.
Mark, thank you. Mark Easton, our home editor. Discounts on energy bills will be offered to households that use less power during peak times, under plans from the National Grid to try to avoid blackouts. The scheme is going to be tested in England, Scotland and Wales on 12 days between now and March, although it is only properties which have a smart meter which are able to take part. National Grid estimates this could save eligible households up to £100. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports.
It's the time of day when many of us get home, put on the lights and all the appliances as well. But millions of us could now earn money off our bills by using less electricity when demand is at its peak. Julie in Saffron Walden is up for it.
So what I've done is I've ditched the kettle and I bought this water dispenser. And the reason I've done that is because I was finding that I was boiling the same piece of water time and time again.
I hear you. She's already taken part in a small trial this year and is signed up for the National Grid's new scheme.
If you've got enough notice, which normally may be the day before, you can plan around it. You can just sort of say, we're going to have dinner at this time. I think is a really good thing for everybody to try and do if they are able to. I think it's something that I've found that I've actually enjoyed doing as part of our lives.
And you've earned some money?
I've earned a bit of money out of it, yeah.
So what's the deal with the National Grid's demand flexibility scheme? There are 12 one-hour tests planned for this winter. They'll take place between 4 and 7 p.m, peak time for energy use. National Grid says a typical household could save £100 off their bills. But it all depends on how much energy you use and your energy company. You need a smart meter to take part. Most energy suppliers are in the process of signing up.
To really reduce your electricity use, it's all about the big appliances like the washing machine, the tumble dryer and the dishwasher, using them late in the evening or even overnight. But is the financial incentive going to be big enough to get households and businesses to take part?
Here at National Grid, they have to balance supply and demand by the minute. They want to be able to save 2 gigawatts of electricity during peak hours if needed, the equivalent of powering 1 million homes.
We're running these things as trials to make sure that it works. We hope not to have to use them this winter in anger, but it's just really being ready for every contingency.
It's something they've never tried on this scale before. They've got mothballed coal plants on standby as well, all to help this control room keep the lights on this winter in these challenging times. Emma Simpson, BBC News, Reading.
COVID-19 infections have dropped in England and Wales, though levels continue to increase in Northern Ireland and the trend in Scotland is uncertain. The latest figures from the Office for National Statistics show about 1.9 million people tested positive for coronavirus in the week ending the 24th of October. That's down from just over 2 million cases the previous week. It's been confirmed that there won't be a Stormont Assembly election this year. The Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris had said another election would be called after the deadline to restore power sharing passed last week. Currently, a vote is still required within the next 3 months. Let's get more from our Ireland correspondent, Emma Vardy. What does this mean then, Emma, for the people of Northern Ireland?
Well, none of the parties were looking forward to a Christmas election. I'm not sure many voters were either. So when that announcement from the Northern Ireland Secretary came this morning, there was quite a lot of relief around. But the reality for people here is that life continues in Northern Ireland without a government here at Stormont. But perhaps the one thing that almost everyone agreed on was that an election wasn't going to solve that the crisis would remain. The DUP won't go back into power sharing with Sinn Féin because of their deep opposition to the Brexit arrangements, which have put a new trading border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. But this Christmas election had been repeatedly promised. So why the change? We understand that there was an intervention from the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, behind the scenes, wanting to give things a little bit more time. Negotiations continue on those problems between the UK and the EU, but for now, some more clarity for the parties here at Stormont. They are expecting the Northern Ireland Secretary to pass new legislation to push that deadline back even further, because as you say, as it stands by law, there would still have to be one at the moment by January the 19th, but in reality now no one's expecting that.
All right, Emma, thank you. Emma Vardy there at Stormont. There is going to be huge disruption on the railways again from tomorrow as members of the RMT and TSSA unions stage more strikes in their long-running dispute about pay, jobs and conditions. But many passengers across the north of England are already dealing with daily cancellations even without strikes. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin reports.
From Newton Le Willows in the northwest to Cleethorpes on the northeast Lincolnshire coast, rail passengers told us they were fed up.
Last week it was cancelled four days, so I had to drive to St Helens Junction just to catch a train.
Regular cancellations, trying to get into work and also coming home at night.
I sometimes try not to use the train now for work because you just can't guarantee if you're going to get a train.
TransPennine Express has come under the spotlight recently for running a reduced timetable and making daily cancellations. Other train companies have had issues too. Avanti West Coast has been criticised for severe disruption and then slashing its timetable after drivers stopped offering to work overtime. It says things are now improving and it will fully restore services in December. But this Manchester businessman is not yet prepared to risk getting the train to meetings again.
I may as well drive because it will be easier and at least I'm sort of more in control of what happens and when I get there and when I can come back. I don't quite trust it just yet.
The boss of the operator behind both TransPennine and Avanti said COVID had caused a backlog of driver training and it was hard to cover the gaps when people were off sick and drivers weren't available to work on days off.
Well, first of all, we apologise to customers. We understand the inconvenience that this is causing people in their day-to-day lives. And it's something that we are trying to correct at this moment in time. We're doing a huge amount of work to prepare for the December 22 timetable, but it does require us to get drivers trained.
But Labour mayors across the north of England have called for urgent intervention from the government.
Genuinely, we believe that the government aren't taking this seriously enough. If London came to a standstill, you could imagine that the government of the day would do something to react to that.
The new Transport Secretary is expected to meet with the mayors soon, and the Rail Minister told me improving services was a priority.
We're committed to working with all parties who have got their role to play in fixing the service issues that many people are experiencing and that are not acceptable. So we will do whatever it takes in terms of sitting down, engaging, working positively, constructively, because at the end of the day, it's the passenger that's impacted by this.
However it's done, those passengers just want to know they will once again be able to rely on getting the train. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Major infrastructure projects are under review as the government tries to reduce spending. The possible cuts, which have been revealed to the BBC, include a high-speed rail line promised for the north of England. A Treasury spokesperson has insisted that infrastructure projects remain a priority. Let's find out more from our business editor, Simon Jack. And let's start with the rail line, the proposed rail line.
Right, so Northern Powerhouse Rail was going to be an all-singing, all-dancing network in the north of England to connect places as far from Hull to Liverpool, but starting around Manchester, Leeds and Yorkshire. Now, that was there was a big splash about that. Then Boris Johnson last year, when Grant Shapps was the Transport Minister, said they were not only downgrading that into a sort of Northern Powerhouse light, but they were also cancelling the eastern leg of HS2. Now, when Liz Truss came into power, she said that it's all back on, the full fat, full singing, all dancing Northern Powerhouse Rail was back on, with a stop in Bradford, one of the worst connected cities in the north. What I learnt yesterday is that has now been downgraded, and we are back to the pre-Truss version that's saving about £20 billion. And I asked Grant Shapps, saying, what's that going to do? Why are you downgrading it when you promised that people's journey times and experience would be better? Here's what he said.
The line itself can deliver a 33-minute journey from Manchester to Leeds, quadruple nearly the capacity of that line, and do so without having to wait an extra 20 years beyond the delivery of what the upgrade can do. So we'll be able to provide all of that upgrade. There wasn't really much point in going and blasting new tunnels through the Pennines.
Grant Shapps, so what else could be in the frame, Simon?
Well, last night I was told by credible sources that every major capital spending project was under review, including things like Sizewell C, the Dartford Tunnel, the tunnel by Stonehenge. This morning, however, Downing Street have said on Sizewell C, the new reactor in Suffolk, that is no longer under review. They're hoping to proceed with that. But I think it just illustrates they're looking behind every cushion at the back of the sofa to try and find some money to fill this £40 to £50 billion hole. And we'll find out more about their plans on the 17th of November.
All right, thank you for now. Simon Jack. The time is 16 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. The BBC has heard evidence that Albanian drugs gangs are using migrant camps in northern France as a recruitment ground. Still to come on the programme, football fans are having to go to fewer matches this winter because of the cost of living crisis.
Coming up on the BBC News channel, with the tournament just 16 days away, FIFA has written to all 32 World Cup teams telling them to now focus on the football following a controversial build-up.
The English National Opera is among arts bodies in London which are losing their funding from Arts Council England. It's part of a programme to move money for cultural institutions out of the capital. New recipients will include libraries in Barnsley, Blackpool Illuminations and a festival of thrift in Redcar. With the details of a major shake-up, here's our arts correspondent, David Silito.
English National Opera. Opera sung in English, based in London, and more than a third of its income comes from the Arts Council. It's now off the funding list. There will be a transitional grant to help it restructure and move, possibly to Manchester. But it's a heavy blow.
So I was slightly surprised that the Arts Council would reduce funding to an organisation that has brought in young people. We give completely free tickets to under 21s, the only opera house in the world to do that. And about 13% of our audience is people of colour, way ahead of other opera companies.
The Mayor of London says the capital is losing around £50 million in arts funding. But Shakespeare North, a new theatre in Prescott near St Helens, is one of dozens of organisations outside London receiving funding for the first time.
We've invested so that as many people as possible in England can enjoy the very best of creativity. This means no matter where you live and whatever your background, you'll have culture close to your home.
Blackpool Illuminations will now receive funding. This shift, especially to the north, is being driven by the government.
It comes down to, I think, fairness. If you live in the northeast, the northwest, Yorkshire, why shouldn't you be able to access culture? Why shouldn't you, your children be able to learn and get that creativity from a young age and be inspired to potentially go into these types of industries?
So, less for opera and the high arts, more for towns like Barnsley, which is getting support for its libraries. David Solito, BBC News.
The social media company Twitter has told its 7,500 staff via email that major job cuts are coming following the firm's takeover by the billionaire Elon Musk. Staff have been told they will know by 4 o'clock this afternoon whether they still have a job. Some staff have already posted on Twitter that they've been fired and locked out of their work email accounts. A gap in GP care between the richest and poorest parts of England has widened, according to research for BBC Newsnight. People in less affluent areas, on average, develop chronic health conditions at a younger age and die earlier. Yet they have fewer GPs and a worse experience. Newsnight's David Grossman reports.
Blackpool is the poorest town in England. It has the lowest life expectancy in the country. And with that, multiple complex health needs. You might assume those challenges would mean more doctors and better care, but come to places like the Revo estate and you'll hear the opposite.
You're always encouraged if you anything that you suspect may be cancer, so I found a lump on my lower back. It was painful. I phoned up my GPs to get an appointment and they suggested it might be better to go to the walk-in centre because I'd get seen quicker. They offered me an appointment, but it was in 3 weeks' time. So they were great, but they did just pack me off with some painkillers. There was no access to a GP, there was no referral to anybody else.
I just sit there crying. I think, what's the point of trying to phone when no one wants to help you?
I rely on my volunteers.
Christina is a youth worker at the centre. She says local kids often come to her for medical advice.
They come and tell us, they're like, Mum tried to make me a doctor's appointment for this, but we haven't been able to, so I don't know what it is, but it's worrying me.
The UK is clearly gripped by a crisis in GP care right now, but research for Newsnight suggests that that crisis is being felt even more acutely in areas like this that are already struggling with multiple deprivations. The figures suggest that places like Blackpool have far fewer GPs per head of population and far lower levels of satisfaction with their care.
Not only are there fewer GPs offering fewer appointments, but the care, as measured by the CQC or Care Quality Commission on average, is of a lower standard. Exclusive research for Newsnight suggests the quality of patients' experience also correlates with levels of deprivation. In other words, the poorer an area is, the lower patients rate their overall GP care. Surgeries are harder to reach on the phone, and when they do get an appointment, patients in poor areas rate the experience lower than those in more affluent areas.
Newton Drive Health Centre, Emily speaking.
Newton Drive Health Centre in Blackpool is rated as good by the Care Quality Commission.
Come in.
Susan Green is a GP and partner. She says criticism of GPs, particularly the idea that they are being lazy or uncaring, is hard to listen to.
It is so devastating to be told that you're the problem. And you have to just say to yourself, I know the reality of what I have done today. I know the reality that if I do crumble and I can't do this anymore, that's another 80 appointments a week potentially lost.
The pain of a struggling primary care sector isn't spread equally. Places like Blackpool have already suffered most. And what was really striking on our visit, no one seemed to think that the stresses on the system were about to ease. David Grossman, BBC News, Blackpool.
And you can see more on that story tonight on Newsnight. That's over on BBC Two at 10:30. Scotland's First Minister has denied that the awarding of a contract to build ferries was a case of jobs for the boys. Nicola Sturgeon said she completely and utterly refuted the claim that the Scottish Government had favoured the bid to build the vessels at Ferguson's shipyard and that she deeply regretted the impact on island communities. The ferries are years late and at least £150 million over budget. The King will host a reception at Buckingham Palace this afternoon as part of preparations for the COP27 climate conference in Egypt, though it was announced last month that King Charles won't be travelling to the summit, following discussions with the then Prime Minister Liz Truss. Well, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is outside Buckingham Palace. So what is this afternoon's reception about? What's it for, particularly given that the King is not going to Egypt?
According to Buckingham Palace, Jane, the purpose of this meeting is to mark the end of the UK's presidency of COP26. Now, the King, we know, has been a passionate campaigner as Prince of Wales on the environment, a passionate defender of the environment for 5 decades, really. He was at COP26 at Glasgow last year. Suggestions that he's disappointed or frustrated at the advice from the Truss government that he shouldn't attend COP27. I'm not sure that's entirely true. As I understand it, he's quite relaxed about it. He accepts that it's part of the necessary adjustment to his new role as king. He cannot campaign as overtly as before. What we're seeing with this meeting, I think, is the exercise of something that we will see in the future. That's his convening power, bringing together leaders, in the words of Buckingham Palace, 200 business leaders, decision makers and NGOs. They will be discussing sustainable growth progress since COP26 and things like the King's Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Terra Carta. That's a roadmap that the King has put his weight really very much behind to 2030 to help businesses find more sustainable futures.
Nicholas Witchell, thank you. FIFA has written to all 32 teams competing at the World Cup, telling them to now focus on the football following a controversial build-up. The host, Qatar, has been criticised for its stance on same-sex relationships, its human rights record and its treatment of migrant workers. The tournament begins on November the 20th. The Football Supporters Association says it's very concerned after a survey found that a quarter of fans at non-league clubs expect to go to fewer matches this winter because of the cost of living crisis. It's another blow to clubs already struggling with rising bills. Despite that, though, there is one club that's opening its doors to help the local community stay warm, as our sports correspondent Andy Swiss has been finding out.
A November night at Chesterfield and a victory for their fans to cheer. But this is a club now offering far more than just football.
Hi everybody, you all right?
It's opened its doors as a warm hub for the local community, where people like Brenda can come for some welcome respite amid the cost of living crisis.
It means a lot. Come here for company. And food's nice and it keeps me warm in winter.
If we can take a little bit of that pressure away and say, actually, every night, come here, there will be food, there will be heating. I hope that that gives families that little bit of comfort.
But fans here too are facing their own financial pressures.
It's not just the price of the tickets, it's the price of what you buy inside. So obviously I've got my coffee here, but the price of that's going up, getting in to come to the match, parking, etc.
Well, a survey by the Football Supporters Associations found nearly a quarter of non-league fans expect to attend fewer matches this winter because of the cost of living crisis. And when it comes to travelling to away fixtures, nearly half say they'll be cutting back.
It's going to be a very, very tricky winter for a lot of football clubs if they're going to be losing a significant portion of their matchday income.
And with clubs also facing soaring energy bills, the emphasis is simply on survival.
We're looking at every angle we can. Can we turn floodlights off earlier after a match? Can we turn them on later before a game?
Do you fear some clubs might go under?
I think it's a constant threat that some could go under. We'll make sure that we're all right here. One way or another, we'll get through it.
A challenging winter awaits then, of battles on the pitch, but even bigger battles off it. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Chesterfield.
Now, 100 years ago today, archaeologists made one of the world's greatest discoveries, Tutankhamun's 3,000-year-old tomb. Robert Hall explores why that breakthrough a century ago caused such a sensation.
33 centuries had passed since human feet last trod the floor on which we stood.
Legend says it was spotted by a young Egyptian, the buried staircase leading to what archaeologists still call the greatest find ever made. Howard Carter had spent over a decade looking for it.
In a tiny tomb, we have everything from the royal court crammed in. We've got gold, jewellery, flowers, lunchboxes, underwear, clothes, sandals. We get a sense of the variety of material that survived from ancient Egypt.
News of the find was rushed here, to Highclere Castle.
The story of Tutankhamun is always linked with one name, that of Howard Carter, the man who broke through that wall 100 years ago. But Carter wouldn't have been there at all without the passion and, perhaps more importantly, the finance of another Egyptologist, this man, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon.
The story sparked what became known as Tutmania, from a few curious visitors to the millions who viewed the wonders of the tomb at travelling exhibitions.
I am sorry, there will be no more admission for the exhibition tonight. It is the
And
last
hanging in the air, the legend of a pharaoh's curse on those who dared to enter the tomb. The newspapers named 5 men as its victims, among them Lord Carnarvon himself. Like Tutankhamun's interlocking coffins, there are many layers to this story. Howard Carter's successors are still finding new pieces of the jigsaw, still solving the mysteries which remain hidden in the Valley of the Kings.
Robert Hall with that report. That takes us to a look at the weather prospects. Darren Bett is with me. Hello.
Hello there, James. Nice day today across many parts of the country. Mind you, it was chilly first thing this morning. There was a frost around in places, and in Scotland temperatures were as low as -3 degrees. It's going to get cold tonight, particularly for eastern areas. Not so much in the west because we've got all this cloud spilling in. You can see how it's wrapped around that big area of low pressure. The low itself is not going to reach us just yet, but ahead of it is pushing well ahead of it all this cloud, and that's beginning to arrive actually across parts of Northern Ireland, limiting the sunshine here. But further east, well, it's been a beautiful day. This is a picture earlier on at Whitby in North Yorkshire. We have seen 1 or 2 light showers running in off the Irish Sea into parts of northwest England, and 1 or 2 are bumping in to the far west and the far north of Scotland. But generally it's dry, and there will be a lot more sunshine to come over the next couple of hours, and those temperatures holding at around 12 or 13 degrees. But it will get cold quickly this evening, particularly for eastern areas with those clearer skies. Out to the west, a few more showers running in off the Irish Sea. Any showers in Scotland moving up towards the Northern Isles. And then that cloud that we saw in the Atlantic is coming in, bringing rain in western areas, of course. That will keep temperatures up here, but across a good part of Scotland, eastern England, temperatures for a while will be down to as low as 2 or 3 degrees. And we've got the risk of frost once again. Chilly start for eastern areas. That cloud is going to move in. We've got the rain in the west, soon clearing away from Northern Ireland. Some sunshine arriving in here, and through the afternoon we should see some sunshine after the rain in Scotland. But for a good part of England and Wales, it's going to be cloudy, not much rain, just rather damp in places, and those temperatures probably peaking at around 12 to 14 degrees in a brisker wind than we've got today. Heading into bonfire at night, if you've got plans, well, maybe a bit more rain coming back into the Midlands as well as southeastern parts of England. For many other areas it may well be dry. Just towards the far northwest of the UK we've got the chance of some showers, and those showers are coming in around that big area of low pressure, which is getting a bit closer. But this weather front is going to be significant. That's bringing the rain actually during the day on Saturday, and through Saturday night it could be heavier as it stalls in the southeast of England before moving away. But then following on from that, we've got some more rain coming in from the west across England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's more of a mixture of sunshine and a scattering of showers, but getting windy in the northwest, perhaps touching gale force by the end of the day. And those temperatures not really changing much for the second half of the weekend. Let's have a quick look at the beginning of next week. It's still windy. In fact, the winds may be a bit stronger Monday and Tuesday, but they're coming all the way from the south, so it's going to be mild. We're going to find temperatures reaching 16 or 17 degrees, but we still have the chance of some rain. Jane.
Darren, thank you very much. Thank you. And that is it from the news at 1 for today on BBC One. We'll join our news teams now wherever you are. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.